Good afternoon, all. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hear
Yeah.
you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Chair Krantz, we're all here.
Okay, very good. Then with that, I would like to call to order the regular board meeting of the North County Transit District for February 18th, 2021. And Anthony, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Board Member Sanchez,
Here.
Board Chair Krantz,
Here.
Board Member Contreras,
Present.
Board Member McNamara,
Here.
Board Member Desmond,
Here.
Board Member Quirk, Board Vice Chair Edson,
Present.
Board Member Jenkins,
Here.
and Board Member Babatal asked me to read into the record the reason for her absence. She does have conflicting meetings on her calendar. Board Alternate Acosta
I'm here.
and Board Member Von Wilpert.
Here.
That is the roll call, sir.
All right, very good. Well, with that, I would like to ask that you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, and now Anthony will provide a safety briefing and review evacuation procedures.
Yes, sir. For those here at the building, in the event of emergency, I will dial 911. In the event of an evacuation, please exit the building using the stairs. Do not use the elevator. Once clear of the building, please do not re-enter unless told to do so by emergency personnel. We have fire extinguishers and fire alarms on each floor of this building. We also have a portable defibrillator located on the first floor and staff on hand trained on CPR procedures. That concludes my safety brief, sir.
Excellent, thank you. And are there any changes to the agenda?
No, sir.
Do we have any public comments for oral communication today?
We do, sir. We received 4 written comments unrelated to any item on the regular board agenda. We received 1 comment opposed to fencing in the city of Del Mar. We received 2 comments opposed to fencing in Encinitas. And we received 1 comment opposed to the addition of parking in the city of Oceanside on the street of Broadway between Cassidy and Moore Streets. Those have been provided to the board and made available to the public, sir.
All right, very good. And as members are participating by Zoom, please use the raise hand feature if you'd like to ask questions or comment. And I will do my best to get to everyone who has raised their hands. We will start with informational item 1. And Karen Tukulski, the Chief Administrative Officer, will review a presentation regarding Railroad Safety Training Program.
Thank you, Chair Krantz. Good afternoon, board members. Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm actually going to turn this presentation over to Mr. Eric Contreras. Eric has extensive background in railroad safety, and for the last 7 years, up till just a couple weeks ago, he taught all the railroad safety classes for the district. He retired just a couple weeks ago, but we managed to coax him out of retirement to come here and be with us today. So Eric's going to go ahead and do the presentation. And then at the end, following any questions, I also have a couple remarks of thanks that I would like to make to Mr. Contreras for his service. So with that, Eric, please take it away.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about railroad safety to the fine group that we have here in assemblage this afternoon. My name is Eric Contreras, and I'll be presenting the synopsis of our railroad safety training program to the folks here in the audience. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So one of the reasons I feel very strongly about this program, as many of the folks at NCTD know, is in my many years, almost 16 here, one of my job duties, incident response and accident investigations, meaning in my tenure here, had to respond to and investigate about 120 of those incidents where somebody has gotten struck or an object is being struck on the railroad tracks. I feel very strongly that education is the proper venue to make sure we keep all of our contractors and employees safe out there in the railroad environment, which is a very, very dangerous and unforgiving environment. So roadway worker protection training is the avenue that we utilize to make that training happen here in the railroad environment. Now, the roadway worker protection training program, some of the folks may wonder why roadway worker protection training is called roadway worker rather than railroad safety training. The reason being, historically, 175 years ago, when railroad operations started in the United States, the section of real estate deeded to the railroads was referred to as the roadway. So everybody working within that section was referred to as a roadway worker. Now, as a background, NCTD operates 2 subdivisions here, the San Diego and the Escondido subdivisions. Quick overview of those 2 subdivisions before we get started here. The Coaster San Diego subdivision, 61 miles of territory extending from San Diego, Orange County line all the way down geographically south of Santa Fe Depot Broadway. So in that territory, we have 40 of that railroad track alignment is currently double track, 90-mile-an-hour track speed on that alignment. And we do hit 90 in several areas, including Camp Pendleton, Oceanside, Carlsbad, Encinitas, and a small portion of city of San Diego city limits. During normal times, which is non-COVID, we could operate up to 60 daily trips in both directions. And on the NCTD subdivision, the Coaster, we also support Amtrak, BNSF, and Metrolink as tenant operators. The Sprinter Escondido subdivision is the light rail alignment, which starts at Oceanside Transit Center, extending geographically east out to Escondido Transit Center, 22 miles of territory there, 7 of which is currently double tracked with 55-mile-an-hour max speed. And on that subdivision, we also support BNSF, which still delivers freight and receives freight at 2 tenants at the far end there. Now, in regard to the background here for safety, obviously, safety is the core value for NCTD. It doesn't matter how many passengers that you transport during your different modes here. If you put them in harm's way or injure them, it's all come to naught. So safety is, again, the core element. As the owner operator of the railroad right-of-way, NCTD has a very, very robust safety and training program. I was very proud to be part of that and implement that while I was here at the railroad. Per the 49 CFR Part 14 requirements, which is our federal standard, All individuals who need to access the railroad right-of-way have to get the roadway worker protection training program provided to them and successfully complete that on an annual basis. This would also be applicable to, direct employees, which would be railroad employees, NCTD employees, also contractors, which would be Bombardier, MV Transit, folks like that, and also extend over into city agencies, municipalities, utility line providers, folks that could have business on or around the railroad tracks. This would also include projects such as the Mid-Coast Transit Extension Project down in San Diego, the El Portal pedestrian underpass in Encinitas, Oceanside Quiet Zone. In addition, coastal and inland rail trails would also be applicable to those people needing and requiring the training. This training is provided currently by NCTD's rail operations contractor, Bombardier Transportation, under direct contract to the railroad. In regard to the RWP training program, roadway worker protection training, this is going to be a 4-hour bilingual Spanish-English training class conducted for people that need to work on or about the railroad property. All attendees have to successfully complete this training. This is a written examination at the completion of each training class. 90% pass-fail rate, meaning out of the 20 questions, you're allowed to miss 2 of those and still pass with that passing standard. Individuals are issued photo ID cards, which they have to maintain in their possession for work activities on the railroad property. We also issue out a white rectangular NCTD hard hat decal, which also has to be in their possession at all times on the railroad property. And annual training is required here, so we don't do refresher training. It's an annual training requirement for the full 4-hour standard. Rules compliance is required as a condition of access onto the railroad property. This course will meet the NCTD, Federal Railroad Administration, which is FRA, and California Public Utilities Commission, CPUC, roadway worker requirements. Since July 1st of 2013, which is when NCTD identified and manifested this training class, we have conducted 1,300 plus of these training classes to over 30,000 students during that time frame. I've personally had the pleasure of conducting 1,128 of those classes to 28,000 plus students. And again, we feel very strongly it's a very good program. So in regard to what the definition of a roadway worker is, it's any employee of a railroad or a contractor to a railroad whose work duties would take them on or near the railroad tracks or with the potential to foul the railroad tracks. This also includes any employee of a railroad, which would be an NCTD employee or a contractor to the railroad whose duties would include inspection, construction, maintenance, repair of railroad tracks, bridges, roadway, signal, communication systems, roadway facilities, or roadway machinery on or near the railroad tracks, or with the potential to foul the tracks. Potential to foul meaning anything outside of our foul zone, which is defined as 25 feet from the nearest running rail, or occasionally off the railroad property. Anything that could potentially impact railroad operations would be in that potential to foul vernacular. This also includes, again, our city agencies, municipalities, utility line providers, all of which have infrastructure running underneath, under, over, or near the railroad tracks. So this would include all of our city agencies, Vallecitos Water District, Encina Power Plant. All of these would have folks that go through and are required to have the training. Training topics that we cover extensively, why we need to have on-track safety. We would also cover our Federal Railroad Administration requirements, which is the federal standard that we abide by here on this railroad. We also cover all of our required personal protective equipment for minimum items, and then anything else that would be considered task specific for work activities to safely be completed out there. The photo that you're looking at here was taken by me about 4 years ago. It seems like it was just yesterday. This was on one of our bigger Sandag double track projects down on the San Elijo Lagoon double track project. This highlights a serious near miss that was experienced here, which is why we rolled this into the training class and are educating upwards of 4,000 students annually on the hazards of parking equipment and materials and staging close to an active grade crossing. Training topics would also include the basics of a proper job briefing. You folks all in the audience here, whether in person or on Zoom, all did a job briefing here before we started the committee meeting here. The job briefing in the railroad is going to set that solid foundation for any work activities we do. We cover job tasks, work hazards, type of protection, time limits on the protection, working limits. Our railroad roadway worker in charge will be identified. Also nearest emergency medical facility, 911, CPR, all covered in a typical job briefing. The photo you're seeing here was also on the San Elijo Lagoon double track project. You can see in this location, upwards of 40 individuals all getting their job briefing and the sign-in completed before they start their work activities. In the training class, we also cover the different types of track that we have out there in the railroad environment, main track, other than main track, and adjacent tracks, all covered in that training module. Also, the training topics would include the different types of on-track protection that we provide here. One item that's not listed here would be watchman protection, which is only designated for minor work activities, engineering studies, job walks, stormwater pollution prevention walks, engineering, cultural, biological monitoring, all be covered by a watchman type of protection for minor work activities. And then track and time form B and form O are our forms of positive protection, which allows employees and contractors with machinery and equipment to work on or near the railroad tracks safely while they do those work activities. Again, track and time that you see here in the diagram utilized primarily for non-planned emergency type of work activities. This is where we give control to a section of the railroad right-of-way directly to a railroad roadway worker in charge who would be working with a dispatcher to maintain safety in that location for emergency repairs and things of that nature. And again, we also make sure that the trains are not going to pass those signals until our work group has cleared the tracks and it's safe for the train activity to continue. In regard to oversight, this is a big one for us here in the agency. Railroad compliance officers, whether they work for NCTD as direct hires or the contractors, would be visiting unannounced, unscheduled, all of our construction sites to verify, number one, proof of training, and also that the site safety rules that we teach them in the classroom are abided by. The regulatory agencies such as the FRA and the CPUC, which is our federal and state entities, will also be visiting construction sites to verify proof of training and that everybody is abiding by the site safety rules. The failure of an audit by any safety official may result in a zero tolerance citation, which can result in dismissal from the railroad right-of-way and loss of RWP qualifications. Failure by the FRA or the CPUC of an audit can result in monetary violations, which go to individuals, work groups, or their employees. Now, again, the folks from NCTD and myself, when I was as a contractor, we could not issue monetary fines to contractors and employees. We could remove them for a series of minor violations that are documented or one major one, but we couldn't ask them to extract money and give it to us. Only the FRA and CPUC do indeed have that ability. And again, the oversight is the way that we keep all the checks and balances in place there, making sure that people would be expecting us to show up out there and make sure they're taking care of business in appropriate fashion. Any questions? Well, that I believe completes the training module here. Again, it's been my great pleasure to address the audience here and let you know how seriously we take safety. Again, the number one element is a safe work environment. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the presentation and for your service to NCTD and the efforts to make the rail corridor safe in all the jurisdictions, I guess, with both subdivisions. Each jurisdiction that is part of NCTD has rail corridor to concern themselves with. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Just briefly before you leave, Eric, so I wanted to just share a little bit more information about Eric's background with everyone. He's very modest in talking about his experience with railroad safety. Eric is probably one of the few people that I've met here who actually can say he helped build the railroad. Eric started working back on the Sprinter project back in 2005 when it was under construction. He was actually working for one of the construction contractors at that time. And then in 2006, he came over to NCTD to actually work on the project on our end as a construction safety officer on that project. Once the project was done and the Sprinter opened for service, Eric moved up into overall railroad safety, and he stayed with us until 2013, which you saw in the presentation is when we formally started the training program through Tazzy, who was then our railroad operations and maintenance contractor. And Eric went over to work with Tazzy in 2013 and developed that program. And as you heard, taught numbers of classes and countless students about the importance of railroad safety. He actually just wrapped up in retirement here at the end of January last month. So he spent well over 15 years dedicated to railroad safety and specifically to preserving that safety here along our two rail corridors. So on behalf of all of us, I did want to say thank you to Eric for all of his work. It definitely has made a difference. Got a little certificate here that I'm going to give him. I don't know if people can see it, but there you go. I'll let you turn around and hold it up. Just a small little decoration for your wall. And then we've got some little goodies for you, little fond remembrances that have all of our logos on them so that you'll always remember us. And we hope you'll come back in the future if we ask you to. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And Mayor Mack has a question. So go ahead.
Thanks, Tony. It's less of a question than a comment. First of all, I really enjoyed the brief, and you know, from my background, safety is a really big deal, and I know that NCTD takes it very, very seriously. And I think this is actually going on at the staff level, but I feel a little bit compelled to talk about it, or at least to make this comment. And we've recently had some capital improvement project work where we being the city are talking with NCTD, and then of course the graffiti removal. And I just want to state again, we kind of feel that there's a more streamlined and cost-effective way to connect with NCTD. And so I just want to encourage the staff to keep that discussion going so that, you know, I think not just us, but all the cities might be able to save a few bucks as we go down this path doing these various things. And that's all I really wanted to say. Thank you.
Absolutely noted. Good point. We will make sure that we continue to work on that.
Eric, thanks for your service and enjoy the parting gifts. I hope you enjoy your retirement.
I certainly plan to. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Very much. We appreciate you.
All right. With that, we're moving on to the items B and C, the minutes for the regular board meeting of January 21, 2021, and the consent items 2 through 14. And there are 13 items on consent. And if I would entertain a motion to have a combined motion to approve the minutes and the consent items.
So moved from Mayor Esther Sanchez, Oceanside.
Thank you.
Second from Edson.
All right. And did you want to comment first before Vice Chair Edson?
No, I was just raising my hand to make the motion, but Mayor Sanchez went ahead and did it. So.
All right. Very good.
Thanks.
Anthony, did you get that? Sir, just bringing up the voting.
All righty.
On the combined motion of Board Member Sanchez, seconded by Board Vice Chair Edson, to approve the minutes of the regular board meeting held on January 21st, 2021, and consent items 2 through 14. Board Member Board Member Acosta, how do you vote?
Yes.
Board Member Quirk? I'm sorry, Board Member Quirk?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, sir. Board Chair Krantz?
Yes.
Board Member McNamara, I think you're on mute, sir. Board Member McNamara. Go. Board Member Sanchez,
Yes.
Board Member Desmond,
Yes.
Board Member Jenkins,
Yes.
Board Vice Chair Edson,
Yes.
Board Member Contreras,
Aye.
and Board Member McNamara. On the motion of Board Member Sanchez, seconded by Board Vice Chair Edson to approve the minutes of the regular board meeting held on January 21, 2021, and consent items 2 through 14. Motion passes with all board members present voting yes, with the exception of Board Member McNamara, no vote.
Okay. Thank you. Moving on to our other business item, number 15. Katie Persons, our Senior Strategic Planner, is going to review this item, which is the North County Transit District's proposed calendar year 2021 discretionary grants strategy.
All right. Good afternoon, board members. Today, I'm going to discuss NCTD's discretionary grant strategy for 2021. Here we go. So each year, NCTD develops the discretionary grant strategy to identify and compete for funding to support our unfunded project needs. NCTD seeks this discretionary funding from a variety of sources, including local, state, and federal programs. Each program and program administrator have their own specific priorities and eligible project requirements. And while each program is unique, the common thread is that many of these programs require substantial local match funding. At last month's board meeting, the board approved the capital improvement program for FY 2022 through 2026. In total, NCTD's unfunded capital needs exceed 1.2 billion, including NCTD's state of good repair needs and the capital projects that are implemented by Sandag. So before we discuss the priorities for 2021, I'll briefly go over the discretionary grant activity from 2020. On this slide, you'll see approximately $136 million was awarded to the region to complete NCTD projects. A fairly substantial amount of the 2020 funding award was for phase 5 of the Delmar Bluff stabilization. And on this next slide, we have a little bit more detail on those 2020 awards. So this table outlines the successful applications from 2020 and includes the program and projects of those applications. So we are still waiting on one last grant application that was submitted in November 2020, and that was to fund a hydrogen fueling station at NCTD's West Division facility in Oceanside. Fingers crossed, hopefully we'll be able to add it to this successful applications list, but that will impact our zero emission bus grant activity over the year. And then for a bit more detail on this last one, the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. On the next slide, we have the 5 key elements from the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, which was the largest award from the last year. And so with this award, Sandag and NCTD were provided funding for phase 5 of the Delmar Bluff stabilization and the Convention Center station, both fully funded. And it also provides double tracking funding for key projects along the Low Sand Corridor. This table includes our unsuccessful applications from the past year, and in total, it represents just shy of $200 million in requests that were unsuccessful. You will notice there's some project repetition. For example, Delmar Bluffs Phase 5 and Convention Center Station design are included on this list, but were ultimately funded through that TCEP award. So what are some of the strategy considerations we think about when we're developing grant proposals? First, we need to understand the goals and priorities of each specific funding program. and we need to link those with well-defined projects. We need to communicate the specific service plans and benefit outcomes that are associated with the completion of the proposed projects. And those benefits include not only passenger, but also safety, freight, and environmental benefits. We need to leverage funding as a demonstration of local commitment, which can be a bit challenge if we're a bit match lean. And we also need to select shovel-ready projects to hit the ground running upon award. So in addition to those strategy considerations, we also utilize a variety of planning resources to help prioritize specific projects, communicate their benefits, and support integration into the broader regional transportation network. So some of those resources include the state rail plan, state transportation plan, SANDAG's regional plan, the Losan optimization study, and the San Diego freight pathing study. So utilizing these planning resources over the last few years, we've grouped our 2021 project priorities into 2 key levels. That includes high priority projects for submittal this year and high priority projects for development and advancement. Starting with those high priority project submittals, we really wanted to focus our efforts on 3 key projects. We have a slide for each of these projects a bit later. So for now, I'll just say that these are high priority and that they have some form of match funding. They're shovel ready and they support a lot of the key initiatives that we see in federal and state programs. And a lot of those initiatives that we see in the programs include enhancing capacity, promoting state of good repair, and deploying zero emission technology. Here we have our project advancement priorities. So we know that these projects will be good candidates for submittal, but we may need to spend a bit more attention to make them truly competitive in discretionary programs. For example, design work completed for Bataquitos Lagoon double track and Eastbrook to Shell double track makes them essentially shovel ready, but they lack substantial local match funding. So we need to take some time to identify the most appropriate strategy for those projects. The remaining 3 projects on this slide require project study reports to further define the project and any potential phasing that may make it more competitive. In the capital improvement program approved last month, NCTD has set aside funding to advance these project study reports in FY 2022. So this map, it might be a little hard to read, but it shows the location of these highlighted projects. The dark blue dots show the project submittal priorities, and the teal dots show the project advancement priorities. Starting with our fuel cell electric bus transition, I mentioned earlier that we're still waiting on one last grant submittal from 2020, which would provide funding for construction of the hydrogen fueling station in Oceanside. The status of this award will dictate specific project activities to the programs that provide funding for ZEB deployment, but regardless of the outcome of that award, we'll still continue to request funding for this broader project. Also, as a note, in 2020, NCTD was awarded $3.2 million for the procurement of 8 hydrogen fuel cell buses from the Volkswagen Environmental Mitigation Fund. And some additional notes on our ZEB deployment. Based on the ICT Innovative Clean Transit ruling, starting January 2023, 25% of all new Breeze bus purchases must be zero emission, and by 2029, 100% of those purchases must be zero emission. And there is a substantial cost differential between our typical compressed natural gas bus and comparable ZEB buses, so discretionary funding will be very key to making up that difference. Moving south now to the San Diego double track and platform. SANDAG and NCTD were awarded funding for phase 1 of this project through the TSEP program. So in order to leverage this award from last year, we are prioritizing San Diego for submittal in order to fully fund both phases of the project. This type of project would be competitive in the larger federal and state programs, including Infra, Build, and TIRCP. And our third and final high priority project is Bridge 257.2, which was originally constructed in 1917. NCTD has programmed funding for design and permitting of this bridge, but requires construction funding to complete the project. we're targeting this project for submittal to programs such as the Federal Railroad Administration State of Good Repair and Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements Program. So in addition to actually submitting grant proposals, there are many supporting activities associated with our grant strategy, and that includes continuing to advance projects to shovel-ready status, coordination with regional agencies such as SANDAG, Caltrans, and LOSAN for funding request submittals, and letters of support and advocacy from our stakeholders. With that, the staff recommendation is that the board approve and authorize staff to implement the proposed calendar year 2021 discretionary grant strategy.
Okay, thank you. Any board member questions or comments? I see Vice Chair Edson has her hand up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Katie. You mentioned that approximately 200 million in grant applications were unsuccessful, but I didn't see anything in there that showed the dollar amount of grants that were applied for.
I do have that number in our discretionary grant document, but I don't have it off the top of my head. I can provide that a bit later.
I was just wondering if percentage wise are approximately half of the grants that we apply for historically approved, or 10%, or
this 2020 was definitely a unique year in terms of grant awards.
Yeah, hey Jewel, this is Matt. Depending upon what program we're talking about, we probably could bat about a 5%. These programs are always overly subscribed, specifically the ones at the federal level. This was a very unique year. The TSEP program came together in a very unique way in collaboration with BNSF and SANDAG, and we leveraged something that meets both our needs and as well as some regional priority goals. And then the second grant that we received for the signal modernization project was something, I think Katie was probably skeptical that we were going to receive funding. So it's very difficult to project that, because I think last year we were probably in the 40 to 50% range, but that is a severe anomaly that I wish would repeat itself every year. But it should typically fall in a much lower percentage threshold of success.
Well, thank you, Matt. I actually asked that question because being this is the beginning of my 5th year on NCTD, I have not seen the success rate in the past. And so I wanted the newer board members to be aware that we don't always get this lucky. So thank you, Katie.
And I found the total that we requested was 335 million.
Okay, Board Member Jenkins. You're muted.
There we go. I have one question on page 11. Those costs, are those today's costs, or do we have inflation costs factored in?
Actually.
Okay.
Let's see.
Page 11.
11. Is that the project advancement priority slide? Is that?
Yes.
Okay. These are total estimated costs for today.
Okay. Could definitely change.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
Board Member Von Wilpert.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. I really appreciate, and I understand why this was a very tough year for grants. I just wanted to check in on the proposal to bring the coaster down to the convention center here in San Diego and the new station. So was it correct that I saw that it has been fully funded?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. And are we still have the correct timeline for that project proposal completion, or has COVID kind of pushed everything back, just like pretty much everything else in the world?
So we are working to finalize that.
Can't hear you, Matt.
Oh, we are working to finalize that project schedule for construction. Right now, it is falling somewhere between 2023 and 2025 in terms of completion, but we're working closely with all of our partners to expedite the timeline as quickly as possible because, you know, not only do we want that station open, but our additional train sets will be coming, but also just getting more dollars into the economy to support jobs. That's super duper critical for us.
Wonderful. Thank you. We're looking forward to it. Thank you.
And Matt, could you also comment on, in addition to the platform, there are some pretty important infrastructure improvements for keeping trains from blocking traffic and things like that. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. There is the extension of the CTC and the positive train control system, which will allow trains to move in a coordinated manner and improve the flow of automobiles through the downtown area. That's going to be a significant benefit for the community so that trains don't end up blocking multiple gates over time. So that's going to be a significant benefit. In addition to that project, as Katie has identified, there's also the Delmar Bluffs 5 project. And then there's also the phase 1 project for the Fairgrounds project, which is about a 4,000-foot siding that's going to provide additional capacity to support freight movement in the short term. So it's a bundle of really, really good, important projects that are going to be able to be advanced very quickly.
And one thing I didn't hear you mention is a maintenance facility for the Surfliner outside of the depot area. Is that part of the project as well?
Well, so this creates the framework for that project to happen. And so that project is planned to be happening. And in fact, Tony, and for a lot of you, you might have seen it showing as a location in National City. Right now, it's being looked at closely of having that facility actually within the BNSF yard. But without the infrastructure improvements that are happening, including the convention center platform, you can't have that. So this paves the way for all of that to happen, plus the potential for future extensions further south for both freight and passenger rail.
Great, thank you. Board Member Quirk.
Thanks. So I just have a couple of observations. It's great to get grants, but this is going to be somewhat consistent with earlier comments. What is the benefit? We're in COVID times, but I see a lot of the money being spent on coaster related activities, and the ridership numbers are so low. I really think that this board needs to pay attention. We skipped over it in the consent item, but I'd encourage all the board members to look at all of the numbers. But the coaster is down 90%. We have remote work trends in place, which seem to impact the coaster type riders, more than other type of transit riders. So, we're talking about spending, hundreds of millions of dollars. We've already spent a lot of money. Ridership was in decline for, 8 or 9 years prior to COVID and then plunged. And, the outlook looks really, bad going forward for the next few years. So, I'm going to vote to approve the strategy here, but I really think that we as a decision-making body here need to look at the numbers and what our expectations are for ridership, based on all of this spending that we're going to put in place or hopefully get. So thank you.
All right, thank you. And Board Member Contreras.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. And, kind of just going, off of Board Member Quirk's comment, historically, I am a new board member, and I was looking at, our ridership, but it looks like historically it might be overwhelmingly that most of our customers are riding buses. Is that correct, or is that just a more recent phenomenon?
Most of our bus customers ride the bus system.
Okay. So with that said, I do believe that there's a lot of emphasis on our railway systems, but really our customers are riding buses more. And when I look at, on-time performance, it seems that our bus has, our bus system has a few failures in being able to have on-time performance. And my question has to do with the future of zero emission buses. These buses are extremely expensive. What is the projected lifetime of a hydrogen fuel cell bus? I know it's a newer technology, but other countries have been using it. So I'm just kind of curious at what the lifespan is, and do we anticipate that they will have more or less mechanical failures?
So the useful life of those zero emission buses is 12 years. What we've seen historically from the early information about battery electric buses is that there's a lower cost for maintenance, but we do see a poor performance in terms of mean distance between failure. We are, just for clarity, advancing a pilot for battery electric buses, and then we're also advancing a pilot for hydrogen fuel cell buses, which seem to more closely approximate the performance that we get from our compressed natural gas vehicles. I would tell you, Board Member Contreras, we agree with you. The prices are significant. We kind of have taken a conservative approach to jumping into it because we've always felt that time is on our side in terms of technology advancements being made. But the bottom line of the whole deal is that regulatory requirements are pushing us directly towards advancing it. And I believe we are advancing it actually at a pace that will ensure that we don't degrade service, but a pace that we can also incorporate the technology into our system and to meet those long-term mandates to do a full conversion.
Sure. So I just want to make sure that as a board, we're cognizant that, most of our ridership is using a bus form to get from point A to point B. So I really want us to have a concerted effort on customer service, which means, even if you're a coastal city, let's make sure that we're focusing where our customers are, right? That's just best practices for customer service. And for us to get to zero delay, which is one of our goals, the trains, the rail systems don't have the same delay issues as our bus routes. And if there's an anticipation, right, that we have to meet certain mandates for zero emissions, which is great, that we are going to be able to have the capital to meet that goal and to also set aside a source of funding so that if we do encounter certain issues with some of these newer technologies when it comes to bus systems, that we have the ability to maintain these properly so that we don't experience the type of mechanical failures that are a little too consistent with our compressed natural gas that we have right now. So that's my only comment, but thank you so much for the report.
Mayor Sanchez.
Thank you. And I'm rising to speak after listening to board member Quirk and also board member Contreras, because it is true, most ridership is by bus, and the way we're going to be able to add more people or make riding rail more popular is to make it more efficient. So our rail, especially in the Spinner, it looks like we're considering, or there's double tracking being planned for certain sectors of the Sprinter. The problem with the Sprinter is that it's not really destination places except for Cal State San Marcos and Palomar between Oceanside and Escondido. And there are destination places that what people need to get to, be it the hospital or the mall or the North County Court Center, the courts, even going to the Escondido Performing Arts Center. I mean, there are certain places that more people will go and will take the bus and take if it's more it's more readily available, and will connect with the rail, even going up and down on the coaster. So I think we were promised that in Oceanside. back 20 years ago with respect to the Sprinter. I'd like to see us do, work at that. I once saw a presentation about, treating buses as rail because, you can have doors slide, have a platform, have doors slide, so you don't have to wait for people to get onto a bus, stepping up, and also make it easier for like rolling people in a wheelchair, and just making it as efficient, effective, and fun as possible. So I'd like to see that. I also am a new member here, so these conversations have probably been had over time. But I just want to kind of underscore that we have to figure out a way to make everything, fun to do, and get people out of their cars, which is really the whole goal here is to maximize usage of busing and rail. Thank you.
Great. I appreciate all the observations there. I would add that 26 years ago or so, an NCTD board made the decision to purchase the San Diego subdivision from North BNSF, which was a different name at the time, but that was a huge decision. And we're now at a point in the life of the coaster where the equipment has just reached the end of its useful life. And so Matt and his staff and the boards over the years have developed a strategy for replacing that equipment. So I recognize that at this point in time, it seems like we're spending a significant amount of money on the coaster, and it's because we are, after 25 years of using pretty old technology. So the staff has put together an excellent program to obtain grant funding for the purchase of new locomotives and for the refurbishment of the coach cars. And so we're going to end up with brand new locomotives and 2 new train sets to offer service that I think will prove to be valuable for people, whether they are commuting or not. It will allow for 1 hour headways on off-peak time and a half-hour headways during peak hours, which to Board Member Quirk's point, there may never be peak hours again. The 9 to 5, 8 to 5 job is likely to have disappeared. So, we made some decisions that didn't take into consideration the fact that we would be hit with a pandemic. Here we are. Meanwhile, to Board Member Contreras' point, which is really important, most of our customers ride buses. And so you will see over the next few years a significant effort to replace the equipment that we are using for rolling stock in the bus transit, the Breeze system. So a lot going on, and getting to zero emission buses is really important because we have a legislative mandate for when that needs to happen. But it's also really critical that we do it in a way that doesn't impact the quality of the service and degrade, on-time performance and such like that. And, the question of battery powered versus battery assisted by hydrogen is a critical one, as well as what will be the source of hydrogen. So there's going to be a lot of very important decisions coming up. And I appreciate Katie's presentation and the continued effort to obtain other people's money to continue to improve the service that we offer at NCTD. So with that, I don't see any other hands raised.
So Tony, at the expense of not extending this, I did just want to address a couple of quick things.
Okay.
I just wanted to tee a couple of things up for future meetings. I agree with Mayor Sanchez's comments about the Sprinter. And one of the key things, and I think, Mayor, you mentioned it yourself, was that whole connectivity between the Sprinter and other key points. And so we're going to be coming to the board with the procurement for an app that's going to support phase 1 implementation of microtransit. We do agree that all of our rail stations, we need to find a way to get people directly to their locations more quickly, and even within our bus systems to allow people to take quicker trips that may be relatively short trips than what we provide today on fixed route. So that is coming. So you should be hearing about it in the next couple of months. And we are targeting initial operations either at the latter part of this year or by April of next year. In terms of enhanced bus, I am actually glad that you brought it up. Concept is called Bus Rapid Transit or Enhanced Bus. We have received grant funding to do a study, and what we're doing is studying our top 10 bus routes. And the real focus is on looking at the road network. And we want to understand what we could do within the road network to improve speed and reliability. And it's great because it's going to be the opportunity for us to work closely with all of the cities, with the public works directors, to really see what we can do to pave a future that's going to give transit more of a competitive advantage, while at the same time improving our road network, so that people will be able to get on buses, quickly navigate through. And you're going to see that our plan is to reduce likely the total number of big buses that we have, but to increase the frequencies significantly on the major lines and then fill in the holes with our rail system and microtransit. So we're all tracking along that way to really make some significant steps forward. I do want to address kind of the coaster. As Tony was mentioning about the coaster was purchased in 1995. When that railroad was purchased, it lacked sufficient capacity to support both freight and passenger. We're just now reaching a milestone where projects have been completed to support increased capacity on the railroad for both passenger and freight. One of the things that we did maybe it was a year and a half ago, was we benchmarked where we were at against other cities to show how poor frequencies we offer. So I can understand that we constantly need to do better, but we have to offer a service that will meet the expectations of commuters. So we're just now rounding that corner that we'll begin to be able to have that ability in the next couple of years to do that. But as the railroad continues to have capacity improvements, it's going to support both the increased movement of freight and the increased movement of passenger rail vehicles. So it's a really good thing. Lastly, I totally agree with Karina relative to the bus system. One of the great things that the board has supported is NCTD working and being fairly creative about how we do so much without actually ever having to take a loan. We were able to purchase all of this new rail equipment, and we've been able to now successfully purchase all of the replacement buses that we need, that by the middle of this year, our average age of our bus fleet will drop from 11 years to 4.8 years. So that will be significant, and probably will be one of the leading agencies in the country in terms of average age of buses. But we do have much more work to do to achieve our zero delay goal, and we'll be talking about that with the board in the upcoming months. So thank you, Tony. I just wanted to make sure everybody kind of knew the context of what is actually happening.
Perfect. And are there any telephonic comments for this item?
No, sir.
All right, I would entertain a motion to approve the district's proposed CY 2021 discretionary grant strategy.
So moved by Mayor Esther Sanchez of Oceanside.
And I see Vice Chair Edson's hand up, but I think her mic she's muted.
Yes, I was moving approval, but also Mayor Sanchez.
Second. Okay.
They want me to help the council give him an F1 so the guy can come over from Nigerian study.
Okay, Mac, I think you're hot mic there.
On the motion of Board Member Esther Sanchez, seconded by Board Vice Chair Joel Edson, to approve agenda item number 15. Board Member Acosta, how do you vote?
Yes.
Board Member Quirk?
Yes.
Board Chair Krantz?
Yes.
Board Member McNamara?
McNamara, yes.
Board Member Sanchez?
Yes.
Board Member Desmond?
Yes.
Board Member Jenkins?
Yes.
Board Vice Chair Edson?
Yes.
Board Member Contreras?
Aye.
On the motion of Board Member Esther Sanchez, seconded by Board Vice Chair Joel Edson, to approve agenda item number 15, motion passes with all board members present voting yes.
Okay, thank you. And I would, to wrap this item up, point out that we, it's obvious we did pretty well in the grant making process here, but it's really important as we head into the new year that everybody pay attention to when you've been requested to provide letters that advocate for particular projects, because the more support letters we have with our applications, the more likely we are to succeed in obtaining those grants. So keep an eye out for those, and appreciate any opportunity you have that you could make those letters available. All right, we're on to informational items, and there are 4 of them. On the first one, Robert Calix, the Chief of Planning, Strategy, and Innovation, will review and provide an update regarding the proposed changes to the comprehensive fare ordinance. Oh, no, Mike, your mic's not on, and you don't look like Robert. You look like Kim.
There we go. Sorry about that. My name is Kim Tucker. I'm the Director of Service Planning with North County Transit District. And this is an item to provide information on the proposed change to the Regional Comprehensive Fare Ordinance to be made concurrently with the rollout of the new fare system. Using feedback gathered today, NCTD will bring a recommendation back to the board next month for consideration and adoption of a position on the fare changes. And with that, I would like to introduce Brian Lane from Sandag, who will provide the presentation.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, NCTD board members. My name is Brian Lane. I'm a senior transit planner with the San Diego Association of Governments. And we've been working closely together with staff at NCTD and MTS on this new fare system and the proposed fare changes that I'll discuss in a little bit. For those of you, I presented this same item at the Transportation Committee a couple weeks ago. For a few of you, you were there and got to listen to that. So if you want to go zone out for 10 minutes, feel free, and come back after that. But next slide, and I'll jump into mine. So I want to give a little bit of background on why we are where we're at today. We purchased the Compass card system in 2003. That was a smart card system that replaced paper passes. It became live in about 2007, 2008. But the software and hardware system is now at the end of its useful life. It also lacks the functionality necessary in a 5G world. So in 2016, the 3 agencies started working on procuring a new system, and essentially chose Init to build the new system. They are a company based out of Germany, but with offices in the United States, and have a lot of fare systems that are in place around the United States, including one that's in Portland. That's similar to what we are planning to roll out here. So, yep, go ahead. What is the Pronto system? Next slide. Thanks. So it's an account-based fare system with real-time communications. Riders will be able to add money to their account easily through various ways, and I'll talk about that. One of the best features of it is it'll allow riders to earn passes rather than paying up front. We call that best fare or fare capping. So they'll always get that best possible fare. Monthly passes will still be available, but that best fare, which I'll talk about a bit, will be one of the best parts of it. They will have that on-the-fly account management, which will be a lot more easier than it is today with the Compass system. There'll be a new Pronto mobile app and a website that'll eventually replace the Compass systems. Multiple cards can be managed from one account, which will be great for a lot of families and other users. And it allows for open architecture to allow for future integration. So if we want to incorporate parking, working with TNCs like Uber and Lyft, with Google, all those other types of technologies, we'll be able to integrate that a lot more easier than we ever could have today with the Compass system. So another great feature of this is we're going to be increasing the retail network for the card purchases today. You can purchase your Compass card at about 60 locations, some of the grocery stores, all the ticket machines on the rail system. But with the new system, we're going to launch starting with about 100 locations and grow that up to over 400. So places like 7-Eleven, CVS's, Rite Aids, places like that. It'll be like a gift card, like you can kind of see in this image, where it'll be on a rack. You'll have that Pronto Purple that'll stand out, and riders will be able to grab that and add and load money to their account very quickly. They'll always, of course, be able to do it online through their phones or on their computers at home. But with these retail locations, for those who don't have smartphones or internet connections, they'll be able to use these retail locations to add money to their accounts. The mobile app features, there'll be a few new features. It'll have the account management you can do through that. The riders will be able to track their progress towards earning their passes. And there'll be a few more online capabilities as well. They'll be able to easily verify eligibility for reduced fares, and the account management that we'll have with our institutional partners like the colleges and universities will be improved with this system. Next slide. So why Pronto, why Purple? It was an exercise collaboration with MTS, NCD, and SANDAG. It was kind of on the term Pronto, which means quick, easy, convenient. I think a lot of folks kind of like that language. It's easily understood in multiple languages. The Pronto Purple is a combination of MTS's red and NCTD's blue branding, and I think a lot of folks really like this color. And it's, like I said, it'll be a unique branding color that'll stand out in those retail networks on those shelves with all the other gift card type cards that you see out there. So next slide. So some of the scenarios that we've been working on over the last year, we have 3 out there right now that we're looking at. We're just in informational gathering time right now. We've done some public outreach that I'll talk about in a little bit, presented to multiple committees and boards. When we first started this work over a year ago, it was pre-COVID. So one of our first goals was being revenue neutral, and you'll hear that term a lot, when we're making changes to the bus system and things like that. If you're trying to keep things revenue neutral, it's increasing some parts, decreasing others. So the best fare capabilities that I'll talk about in a little bit, do probably cost the 2 agencies a little bit more of fare revenue. So our first scenario that we looked at was to try and keep it a little bit fare revenue neutral, and that was to reduce the youth one-way cash fares from the $2.50 down to $1.25 to align that with the discounted SDM, Senior Disabled Medicare cash fares that we started a couple of years ago. We were looking, though, to increase the adult one-way cash fares on most bus and light rail services from $2.50 to $2.75. And then in accordance with that, we would also increase the MTS Access and NCTD lift fares from $5 to $5.50. The fiscal impact for NCTD would be estimated to result in reduced annual fare revenue in the $93,000 to $354,000 annual range. And again, these numbers and any of our ridership guesses and all that were pre-COVID numbers. We hired a fare elasticity consultant to help us run these numbers, and all the data we had was pre-COVID. So during COVID and when ridership's down, these numbers would be different, but obviously your numbers are well different now than they were over a year ago. Scenario B would include all those changes in scenario A, but would also increase the adult regional monthly pass from $72 to $75, and increase the youth and SDM pass from $23 to $24. And I think I forgot to mention at the beginning of this, all these scenarios would include those best fare capabilities for the day pass and monthly passes for Sprinter, Breeze, bus and trolley down in the South County portions. So for this scenario, it would have a little bit of a potential reduction in annual fare revenues up to $218,000. And then our last scenario that's on the table is simply including the best fare capabilities and only reducing the youth one-way fares from $2.50 to $1.25. So there'd be no fare increases. So obviously this one has a bit more of a fare annual fare reduction that NCTD Breeze would collect, and that's in a range of $346,000 to $567,000. And the reason we're using those ranges is, again, the consultant is using an elasticity model, trying to guess, if you increase a fare X amount, how much ridership may you lose? If you decrease a fare, how much ridership can you gain? And over the years, we've used the same consultant, and he's done a pretty decent job, but it's hard to see how well his model has done because the other factors always come into play in between us changing the fares. Gas prices are changing, other things like that. So next slide. So I'll get into some examples of these of the best fares. The first one would be for an SDM rider, the Senior Disabled Medicare rider. They have that reduced fare. If they're traveling 3 days a month or 3 days a week, taking 2 trips a day, and estimating that's about 13 days of travel for the month. Today, they'd likely pay cash for each of their trips. They'd pay $1.25 for each trip, so that'd be $2.50 a day. And if they rode about 13 days a month, that'd be $32.50 a month. With the Pronto card, they would load $7.50 or so a week onto their account. And for that first week, it would charge $1.25 for each of their 6 trips that week, and they'd have $7.50. And then second week, they'd be up to $15. Third week, they'd be at $22.50 if they kept riding those same number of trips. And by week 4, when they take their next trip, only 50 cents more would be deducted. So now they've hit that $23 cap for the SDM or the youth monthly pass price. And the system's smart enough to realize that they've reached that monthly cap and would stop charging them. So their monthly pass would then be earned on that 10th day of travel. All other trips for the rest of the month would be free. And one of the great benefits with the system, they didn't have to come up with that $23 at the beginning of the month. They just paid each week or each time they just load a few bucks onto their card to get them to that 23 by that 10th day of travel. So for this rider, that savings for this example would be $9.50 a month. Another example on the next slide would be for an adult rider traveling 5 days a week, taking 4 trips a day. So this is a commuter, likely taking a bus maybe to the Sprinter to work, and then the Sprinter back to the bus to get back home. So assuming they're working 22 days a month, today that rider likely would buy a $6 day pass each day. They'd spend $132 in a month. With the Pronto system, again, they just load some money onto their account. So all they need to put would be $6 a day into their account. And so each trip that they took that day, it would deduct $2.50. So it would deduct $5 for their first 2 trips that day. But then again, the system's smart enough. So on their third trip, it wouldn't charge $2.50 more and putting them past the day pass price. It would only deduct $1 more, knowing that $6 is the day pass price. So the card would be smart enough to realize that they've earned their day pass, and they'd have unlimited rides for the rest of the day. So the Pronto card wouldn't charge them anymore. And then so they'd keep doing that day after day, and the system would be smart enough to realize that on their 12th day of travel, they've spent 12 times $6 and $72, and they'd now be at that monthly pass price, and the system would then stop charging them. And for the next 10 days of travel, they'd have free rides essentially. And again, so they wouldn't have to put $6 into the account for the next 10 days. They could stop, worrying about their account. They would not have had to come up with that $72 a month pass at the beginning of the month. And for that rider, it'd be a savings of $60 a month. So next slide. So some of the public outreach we did, we had 3 virtual sessions in early January. We advertised the heck out of that on Take One cards on all the buses and trains. We had Facebook, Twitter, newspaper advertisements, multiple languages. We had some great comments from board members on ensuring that we're getting multiple languages out there for these announcements. We had 151 folks participate. We made sure we spread those sessions out. We did one on a Saturday, one during the day on a weekday, and one at evening. And we got some great feedback. The riders were starting to understand what best fare is and the capabilities. They understand that as a positive thing. They understood when we talked about, that would start some funding gaps, and that could be a problem for the agencies. But they didn't want those funding gaps to be increased by increasing fares. We also went to the Sandag Social Equity Group and made this presentation, as well as to the Sandag Social Services Transportation Advisory Council and made the presentation, and heard similar sentiments. And like I said, I went to the Transportation Committee a couple weeks ago, and I'll talk about that. Yeah, so here on February 5th, I presented the same item to them. The membership there discussed the impact that the fare increases would have on low-income riders, and were concerned that that would have a negative impact, especially during COVID. And there was a sentiment from a few members there that they wouldn't like to see that kind of an impact during this time. So a few members did recommend that MTS and NCT's boards consider those increased concerns during their considerations of your fare scenarios for the Pronto. So next slide. So we're still receiving input. No boards have taken a vote yet on this item. We're just collecting information. This item will be back to you guys later next month. But we, through March 1st, we're still asking riders and stakeholders to provide their input. We've had a ton of ways that they can do that via mail, email, phone line, our webpage. We'll compile all those comments and provide that as an appendix to the reports that you receive in March. Next slide. So we did present to the MTS board in January. They heard a little bit about it, had a few follow-up questions. They ended up not hearing that item last week. The fare consultant wasn't ready with some of the new numbers. You guys will hopefully hear it at your board meetings in March and with some recommendations on how to proceed. And then the Sandag Transportation Committee would ultimately hear it at their meetings in April and recommend that the ordinance be revised for the pilot that we could start hopefully this summer with Pronto. So last slide, I believe that's it. And I'd be happy to take any questions or comments.
Board Member Jenkins.
Okay. I guess my initial thought is, and I have to agree with some of the thoughts that some of the comments that were made at the Transportation Committee. I just think the timing's not good with trying to increase ridership. Well, bring it back, let alone increase. I don't think increasing the fares is a good idea. I understand the need to try to be concerned about the financial side of it, but I think we're going to kind of we're going to affect those that we're trying to get back into transportation and the lower income people that would be negatively impacted at this point in time. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Edson.
Thank you. I agree. I actually did attend the Sandag Transportation Committee representing the district, and as Brian mentioned at that meeting, there were many concerns raised about increasing fares for low income and other riders during this particular time with the pandemic. One thing I like about the scenarios, to kind of go back to another comment, is the upfront cost feature, with the exception of Coaster. I think that many of our riders are low income or from disadvantaged communities. And I think that that's going to be a great benefit to those riders. But I do have a question and about other sources of funding that might be available to offset such impacts. I support what came out of Transportation Committee, but have a question about how we balance the costs.
Board Member Edson, this is Matt. We will be able to balance the budget without respect to whether the board approves or does not approve the proposed fare increases. As you can see from the prior slide, the financial impacts identified for NCTD actually are not significant. One of the key things that we wanted to do in the process was to protect the coaster in the process. So we did not include it in fare capping because it has significant potential impacts by including it in there. I believe the coaster represents about 30% plus of our total customer revenue. So we wanted to protect that. So long story short, we will be able to navigate without respect to whether or not the board approves offsetting fare increases. There are changes, I think all of you are aware, that have to be made to the fare ordinance to incorporate the new features provided by the Pronto system.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay, Board Member Von Wolpert.
Thank you. And thank you so much for the presentation. I appreciate it. And I'm sorry, I'm looking to my right because that's where my second monitor is. And so I have the PowerPoint open with me, but I just want to ask a couple of questions about slide 6, please, about the fare adjustment scenarios. And I'm just seeing the fiscal impact statements that seem to be pretty wide ranges and pretty big numbers. And so in scenario A, for example, that's a pretty big difference from 93,000 to 354,000. Is that saying that there's different combinations of the increase or reductions, or I'm not sure how those numbers are explained?
So our consultant provided a range. He was making, and you know, in conjunction with us, the CFOs from both MTS and NCD, kind of providing a lot of great input. We trying to make a guess on how many of the cash riders would take advantage of that best fare scenario, or that may be riding enough to actually get the benefit. And so the more that do, the more that costs both agencies revenues. So the range is, the small side of the range is if only half of the cash riders take advantage, and then the high end of the range is if 100% did. So, you know, kind of working in the spirit of ranges and making our best guess. That's kind of where that could be. So, and again, these were all pre-COVID numbers. So these were pre-COVID annual revenue numbers and ridership numbers. So the consultant purely used those. So you just throw all of that out the window now with COVID. It'd be a lot less, obviously, because there are less riders at this time. But you know, as we start rebounding our ridership and revenues, that would also, you know, change.
Okay, thank you. And then with scenario C, the reducing the youth one-way fares by 75 cents would result in a budget impact of $346,000.
No, that would, I can't remember if I isolate that only in the model, what that has. It's a lot smaller than that number. Again, that number is from implementing the best fare capabilities for the adult cash riders, or even those who maybe today are buying a monthly pass. They might stop buying a monthly pass in the future, and then just start. You know, they may not ride enough in a month to get the monthly pass value in the past. Now they'll just start, you know, buying their daily pass and may only spend $70 in a month. So instead of buying $72 pass, they might only be spending $70. So it's all kind of guesses on how much people are riding and all that. But yeah, most of that impact on that last scenario is from adult cash riders.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, so I had misread that to think that one small change was going to result in that large.
No.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And following up on that particular question, you are on these slides with these three scenarios showing fiscal impact for NCTD. There's a corollary fiscal impact for MTS, correct?
Correct.
And how joined at the hip are we on the fare situation? Is it possible that NCTD could forego a fare increase, but MTS might increase their fare, or are we connected?
We're very connected. So I'm sure MTS staff is listening at this time as well. And Sharon from MTS might be listening, but you know, we're working closely together on this. So we're hoping that the recommendations in March for both boards will be the same. So, you know, we've reached out to the boards last month and this month to NCTD to hopefully get on the same page and move forward. You know, yeah, again, we're hoping to be connected and that we have a seamless changes to the fare ordinance. If we don't, we'd have to come back to the boards again and try and find out what the differences are. And it could happen if, you know, you're not on the same page with that, but it would take a little more time to iron that out and move forward with it.
And is it safe to say that because of the difference in size between MTS and NCTD, that the fiscal impact for MTS is in the 2-3 times as much range, or is there a way to put a number to that?
Yeah, I have it in a spreadsheet somewhere, but it is probably 3, 4, 5, 6 times more to MTS, and they've heard the same numbers and heard the same feedback from their riders and a lot of their board members. And knowing that, you know, right now during COVID, these numbers are a lot less. And, you know, if they're hoping to fill it in with federal relief monies for the time being, and then see how things come in a year from now, once we're pulling out of COVID, ridership's rebounding, budgets are hopefully starting to look a little more normal, and then getting a sense of where we can move forward from there.
All right, thank you. Board Member Acosta.
Great, thank you. I had a lot of the same questions about this slide and the fiscal impact. So I would just suggest that in March, when the presentation is made, that there's a lot more detail and clarity around the fiscal impact. And then I wanted to compliment you on the design of the app, I think, and the design of Pronto in general. I think it's so important to have a program that is catchy and engaging, but also very functional. I'm a rider, not right now, but I have been a rider, and the Compass was glitchy, very glitchy in my experience. And I'm really glad to see that this program is being rolled out and that it's innovative. I think it will improve ridership and the ridership experience. So I think that needs to be the focus of this, in addition to ensuring that we are able to pay for it. I do think the best fare, flexible fare program is great. I think that people will need education about it, and I'm glad that that's already begun through the surveys and the focus groups. So thank you for that. Just to clarify, could you have, so even post-pandemic, could you have a completely like touchless experience where you purchase your ticket via the app, you show your ticket via app? I just wanted to clarify that that is something, because I do expect after the pandemic, some people still have some hesitation and maybe still want to wear masks and maybe still be kind of touchless.
Yeah, definitely. The app will have, and it'll be an upgrade from the current app today. Today, if you buy a pass, you show the driver or the conductors on the trains. It can be easily counterfeited a little bit. People can take a screenshot of that and share it with their friends. It takes some work to do that, and I think some people are caught doing it. With the new system, you'll have a QR code that'll come up on your screen, and that code it'll change every few seconds, and so you can't share it easily. And then you would just the readers at the stations and on the buses, you would flash that QR code in front of the screen, so you don't have to actually touch. And even the cards themselves are basically contactless. You can come within about an inch or so without having to touch.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, Mayor Sanchez.
Thank you. And you may have said this. I'm still wrapping my mind around this. So scenario A is basically no passes. Scenario B includes the monthly passes, right? Was that basically it? Scenario B includes A plus monthly passes, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. By the way, Pronto is going to be a high standard to meet. So that's cool. I like that. No, I think this is good. I was thinking about someone who might be a student who, I don't know, usually they don't go all 5 days of the week, but say someone does, then getting a monthly pass certainly makes a lot of sense for that person. And if we don't have it, then people are going to try to catch a ride with someone else, right? So no, I think this is good. Other question that I had was, when you say potential reduction in annual fare revenue, does that mean that it's being subsidized? Because you're not saying, is this the gap, or is this or is this just revenue in general?
So this is the fare revenues that both agencies collect. So the numbers I'm showing here are the estimates for NCTD fare revenues that they.
Right. So would that be well, then what's the gap?
So it is a gap. So this is the gap that you see. So this is how much less revenue may be collected because of the scenarios that we're presenting. And
Okay,
again,
so
it's pre-COVID assumptions and all that. It will be less. And one of the board members asked if we could come back with more specific numbers, and maybe I'll let Matt
yeah,
answer
I heard
this.
that part of it.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, I did hear that part, and I'm looking forward to that. I was just trying to figure out revenues versus gap versus subsidizing, that kind of thing.
Right. And
All right.
all of that is difficult, and I'm not sure if I can come back next month, or Matt, if we could have more precise numbers. It's kind of a guessing game with these models. We're just trying to estimate the impacts, and again, it was all pre-COVID. So
right, but it looks like the public certainly did want to it looked like the public is supporting more like a scenario B. Is that just do not want the funding gap filled by increased fares, right? So
But scenario C has no increases.
yeah, I mean, we're talking about $1 for youth and senior and $3 for adult on the monthly pass. And then, yeah, minimal. All right, thank you.
So Brian, and Board Chair Cranes, just a couple of quick comments for clarity. So these models that produce these kind of estimates, these are not live and die by life models. Really what we focus in on is looking at the upper end potential risk of changes. And this is really, difficult to project because whether it was COVID or not, the key change to this whole fare system is something that is from a business perspective, something that you would really evaluate closely. So today we say we only offer a monthly fare product for customers. So you don't have that best fare capabilities. But what that means for the district is that we get all of our money up front. A large portion of our money, we get it in hand. And if you change your mind, I still have the money. And if you think about that, like from your utilities company, your cable company, or any other company, or your gym, getting that money up front is a very meaningful thing. When we switch to this best fare capabilities, that means that person may not ride. So the best potential case for us implementing best fare capabilities is that anybody who uses it taps it enough to equate to a monthly fare. So the best case scenario that we could ever have is that we would break even. And the most likely outcome is that we would always lose money. And so we're not going to be able to overly refine this, but from just a basic economic principle, I would just tell people, yes, we're going to lose revenue. We don't know to what tune we're going to lose that revenue until we see actually how people change their trip habits or their purchasing habits related to tickets, because I don't know, I can't speak to whether customers will make the decision that I want to have my monthly fare so that if anything goes wrong, I can be able to take my trips. Or some people are going to say, I'm going to pay the maximum fare for X number of days, and then I'm going to have a monthly fare. We don't know. So the numbers are not going to get significantly more precise. But my comment to you guys as board members is we are able to navigate this as we implement it. And this is going to be a good baseline year for us to start understanding the behavior changes.
Right. I mean, families tend to want to help, family members want to help the student by saying, hey, I'm going to buy your bus fare, your monthly pass. I mean, there are a lot of habits that I think, taken into consideration. If you take those into consideration, maybe there'll be more revenue. I mean, so anyway, thank you.
Board Member Contreras.
Yeah, thank you so much for this presentation. I just want to echo what some of the other board members have said about this app, Pronto. I mean, it goes along with providing really good customer service and ease of use. And, I am curious to see if there's, a scenario where we're seeing, more volume. Because when we're talking about losing revenue, we're talking about like the current way that people are utilizing transit. So I'm just curious to see if there's anything, a way to project, if there's more volume, because it's just easier to use. And then some of the other strategies that we talked about before in creating a more comprehensive and connected network, if there'll be a change there. But really what I wanted to say was I 100% support the reduction in youth fares. I think that's incredible, especially because a lot of our constituents in various cities, when we're looking at youth in school districts, there's a real big disconnect for our youth. And I think it's great for public transportation to be an option that they're able to utilize. And with that said, if we are able to create a seamless and really great experience with public transit, starting at a young age, that's someone that potentially will continue to utilize public transit and the different modes of public transit for, longer than just being a youth. So I really just commend, the board and past boards and staff for going in this direction. So just, thank you so much for that. And when it comes to looking at some of the gaps, I know that, COVID will be over and perhaps there won't be any additional grants or money that can be used to decrease the gap that we're seeing. But since we are in a scenario where we are receiving, assistance with some of our gaps in revenue, I don't know if it's possible to have when this comes back to us, a presentation that includes possible amounts of grant or other types of funds that are, concurrent with the COVID crisis. So we can kind of see, okay, we see it for this year and maybe next year, a reduction in a certain gap in revenue, but we have, X amount of dollars in funding that we could at least apply during the COVID crisis. I don't know if that makes sense, but that would be, I think, really helpful for the board to be able to kind of see in the near term possibilities to plug up some of these funding gaps. But just thank you so much for this presentation. It's very lovely, and I appreciate the direction that we're going towards to make it a very seamless experience for our customers that utilize public transit.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Desmond.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to get a clarification. Today, this is just the information item, and then you're going to come back to us, I think, in about a month or so. I saw the dates there for an action item. Are you anticipating us picking scenario A, B, or C at that point in time, and then forwarding it on to Sandig Transportation Committee? Is that the plan?
Correct. We're hoping staff will actually have a proposed scenario recommendation by March, based on all the information we're getting from your board, MTS's board, and Sandag's Transportation Committee members. So hopefully we can narrow it down to one and give you more details, and have Title VI, social equity analysis behind it, plus all the public comments.
Okay, Jim, it looks like you have internet issues.
Receive the information, or did they have comments on A, B, C, or moving forward? Correct. All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Sorry,
I'm on government Wi-Fi. So did MTS have a similar discussion as what we're having? And I guess as far as A, B, or C, or they just received the information and you don't really have any input from what they said, I guess, at their meeting last week?
They received similar scenarios, had similar input to what we're hearing today from some of your board members and the Transportation Committee members. So, I think we have a good sense of where to move forward and what proposal we'll come back with in March.
Okay, so at this point, Matt, you don't have a recommendation, but you're going to have a recommendation at our next meeting. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Vice Chair Edson.
Thank you. Are you through there, Supervisor Desmond?
Well, I was going to make a motion to receive the report if we needed it. If it's just information item, then no, I guess.
It is just information.
So,
Okay.
Like Director Acosta and Contreras, I think that the best fare capabilities have the potential to positively influence ridership by reducing the overall cost of regularly riding. public transit. When I lived in places with robust public transit, if I had the choice to walk 6 blocks or hop on the subway or train or whatever, and it didn't cost me anymore, I would definitely hop on the train or the subway. And I think that, as Katrina mentioned, it's that cultural shift. Having people start riding public transit and realize, hey, if I get to this best fare thing, this is all riding for free. It's good. Director Quirk has made mention of the fact that he sees transit go by empty. We want people on the train and on the bus, whether we're actually increasing revenue at that point from that extra rider. We've got some revenue by getting that rider on there to start with. So I think there's a little bit of a chicken and egg scenario. And if we can manage to significantly increase ridership through programs like this, I think that at the end we are creating a revenue stream that's for the district. That's something that we can rely on. So I know Rome wasn't built in a day, and it may take some time, but I think that this is a really good move. So, and also, nope. That's it. I like the upgraded QR codes to reduce the counterfeiting. I think that that's a great technology move. So thanks.
Okay, I see no additional raised hands, and this is an informational item, so we don't require a vote at this point, but brace yourself for the important votes ahead on this. And item number 17 will be introduced by Katie Persons, our Senior Strategic Planner. And she is going to be introducing it. The presentation will be by Jose Nucio, the Transnet Program Director. Obviously, this is a very important update for the board because we have a number of key projects that remain unfunded. And most of them will include capacity enhancing bridge projects and double tracking of the Sprinter. So it's important to note that the double tracking projects replace bridges that have reached the end of their useful life. And with that, Katie, kick it off.
Thank you. I'll be brief, but as a great complement to our grant strategy discussion, Jose Nuncio at Sandag is the Transnet Department Director. And he will give us an update on the Transnet Major Corridor Program.
All right, thank you and good afternoon. I'm not seeing my presentation coming up yet. Are you advancing that for me? There you go. Thanks so much. All right, thank you, NCTD board members and Executive Director Tucker for the invitation. Today, I'm going to be covering the Transnet Major Corridor program, which is part of a larger Transnet ordinance. Also providing a status on investments along the coastal corridor, how much money was initially available, how much money remains, some challenges for the program, and some considerations for the NCTD board as it moves forward. Next slide, please. So this is taken from the ballot from back in 2004. So transit is a half-cent sales tax that was approved by voters in 2004 as an extension to the original 20-year measure approved in the late 80s. It provides funding for highway, transit, local streets and roads, bikeway, environmental projects, and other smaller grants for transportation essentially across San Diego County. And as I said, it is for 40 years, so it expires in 2048. Currently, it collects about a little bit over 300 million, about 310 million this particular year. Next slide, please. So this flow of funds chart shows how the money is distributed essentially by formula amongst the various programs that I mentioned before. If you can imagine the money coming in from the top, There's about 3% that's taken off the top for administration, the bicycle program, and oversight expenses. And then the net, the remaining revenues, about 97%, are distributed according to the boxes that you see here. I'm only going to talk briefly about 2 of them here, and then I'm going to spend most of my time on the third. Next click, please. So this is the major corridor bucket, and it gets 38% of the net revenues. This is where the major capital projects reside. So this is where the coaster and the sprinter projects are included. It also includes highway projects like the expansion of the 78, the Interstate 5, Interstate 15, and so forth. So this is the bucket that receives 38% of the funds and supports the development and completion of those larger projects. The Transnet ordinance included 47 projects as part of this program. Next click, please. Next click. Thank you. This is just for NCTD's information. This is the bucket that provides funding for operations for the transit agencies, both MTS and NCTD. Receive funding from this bucket. And then next click, please. And this is also for operations funding for the transit agencies, but this one covers the specific subsidy needs for any of the new transit services that are implemented as part of that initial bucket that I showed you, that the major corridors bucket. So for example, when the coaster expands its services as part of the transnet extension program, this particular bucket would cover the operating cost for that incremental service. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm going to start drilling in a little bit and to get to the coaster corridor, which is the focus of this presentation. So this is also taken from the Transnet ordinance, and you can see that the 47 projects are essentially grouped into about 16 or actually 15 corridors here. The each of the corridors was estimated back in 2002, and you can see the total capital cost column. So that's essentially taking all of the projects within each corridor, and that's how much it was going to cost back then. There's a mitigation cost that was identified as part of each of those corridors, and that was broken out because there's a separate bucket within Transnet that pays for that. So we wanted to make sure that people could see what was going to be paid for. And then the third column over to the right is the net capital cost. And so this is the piece that is paid for out of the Transnet major corridors bucket. The one that I explained includes all of the large projects. Next click, please. Next click. There you go. So one very important assumption within Transnet, if you add up all of the net capital costs on this column, you see that they add up to 9.4 billion. The key assumption in Transnet is that Transnet dollars would pay for half of the net capital cost. The other half would come from state and federal funds, other funds, but Transnet would only cover, would essentially leverage, these local funds to attract these other state and federal funds to complete and essentially stretch the value of the Transnet dollar. So this is a very key assumption that is carried through throughout the program. Next slide, please. And next one, please. All right, this is just a map showing the original projects that were part of the Transnet extension. So as I mentioned, there's transit, managed lanes, just general highway expansion, as well as connectors at some of the major freeway interchanges. Next slide, please. All right, so now, back in 2005, shortly after the measure had passed, the SANDAG board approved implementing what was called an early action program. This was issuing bonds, over $2 billion have been issued to accelerate the completion of a number of projects. So what you see here is a map of projects that have been completed or that are in progress. And when I say in progress, it means that the project is either going through the environmental phase or the design phase, or perhaps it's under construction. So this back includes both. The solid lines are those completed projects, and then the sort of broken lines are those that are in progress. Next slide, please. So this map shows those projects that SANDAC has not yet started. And it's not as many of the projects. Something interesting to note is that in the first quarter of the ordinance, so essentially the first 10 years of the time of the ordinance, a third of the projects were completed and about a quarter of the projects were in progress. So that leaves for the remaining projects, and these are shown in this future projects slide. This particular slide is important in the sense that as we move forward, we need to identify funding for those. And as I'll go over, the region is facing significant challenges to be able to do so. Next slide, please. Okay, now getting into the coastal corridor a little bit. First, I wanted to describe how the projects in the Major Corridors program are very specifically defined. So if you look at the second row, it says row number 26. It says that the improvement is on Interstate 5 from Highway 56 to Leucadia Boulevard, and the improvement is to add 4 managed lanes to the existing 8 freeway lanes. This is a very specific definition of the improvement that was included as part of the ordinance. And most of the projects that are included in the ordinance are defined in this way. Moving to further down in the table, there's actually 2 row 31s. And the first one covers the capital costs. And you'll see that the definition is a little bit more diffuse. It says, corridor transit improvements that would include some combination of projects from the following. And then there's 2 different transit scenarios. One is the coaster, and the other one is a bus rapid transit along El Camino Real and I-5. And then under both of those, there's a series of options. There's vehicles, station improvements, parking, double tracking in the case of the coaster, or direct access ramps in the case of the bus rapid transit. There's even the Del Mar Tunnel that's included as part of this definition of potential improvements. So back then, there was no clear consensus in terms of what would be the ultimate transit solution or scenario for the I-5 corridor. So at the time, the SANDAG board decided to essentially leave the options, for improvements and assign a dollar value to complete as many of those as possible. But it's important to note that the amount that was identified was not intended to complete every single thing that was listed in the improvement. Essentially, it was a dollar contribution and intended to leverage as much of state and federal funds as possible to complete as many of these. So for example, on the double tracking, which is what has been the focus of the coastal corridor, as the dollars get spent down, we keep track of how much has been spent and how much remains for that. But it was not the intent to double track the entire corridor, nor was it the intent to do all of these things. So it was more like, use this money judiciously and stretch it as much as you can to complete as many of these things. By the way, the bus rapid transit scenario was dropped from the regional plan back in 2007. So at this time, the focus really has been the coaster. One other thing that I wanted to point out here is that you'll see that it was $400 that was identified with a mitigation cost of about $24 million, leaving a net capital cost or contribution, I should say, for the coastal corridor of $376 million. But as I mentioned, a key assumption within transnet is that it only covers half. And so transnet, in this case, would only contribute with $188 million, which is 1/2 of that 376. Keep that 188 in mind because I will go back to it. One of the things that I was asked to do is go over, how have these dollars been spent? Where have they been spent? Which projects, when, and maybe more importantly, how much money remains of that 188. And then just for your information, that next 31 line down at the very bottom, that's the operation. So once the coaster, or back then we didn't know, but now that we do, once the coaster achieves that greater level of service, then it's operating dollars that would flow out of that other bucket that I talked about to support NCTD to operate that expanded service. Next slide, please. I'm just going to cover this one really briefly. The Sprinter corridor was defined in the ordinance in a similar fashion. There was no clear consensus about what the transit solution would be along the corridor. And so both a Sprinter and a bus rapid transit solution were included. And again, there was a dollar contribution that was assigned to try to complete as many of these projects as possible. Next slide, please. All right, now we're moving on into what has been completed. So this slide shows all of the projects that have been completed for the coaster corridor. Most of them are double track projects. On the right, you can see the map and the location of the various improvements. On the left, you can see that pie chart, and Transnet covers about 159 million, which is about a third of the 491 million that has been invested so far on completed projects. Next slide, please. So this slide shows those projects that are in progress, meaning projects that are either in the environmental phase or the design phase. I think Katie talked about those projects in her earlier presentation. Some of these lack construction funds, and we'll get to that in just a second. In this slide, we show that 63 million of Transnet dollars, that's the blue slice, are essentially leveraging the remainder of the funding for a grand total of about 200 million for these projects. This, by the way, also includes the 59 million that the Sandag board identified just about a year and a half ago for the procurement of 2 new train sets for the coaster corridor, so that the NCTD or the district can go ahead and expand service once those new train sets arrive. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, it's essentially further expanding on that very last slide that we just saw. And it shows the current funding that's being applied to the specific projects that are listed on the left. And you can see that there are 4 projects that have a unfunded need. And the unfunded amount is over $500 million to be able to complete those. These are dollars that are needed for the construction phase of these projects. Next slide, please. This slide shows, all of the projects that have been completed with Transnet Major Corridor funds, plus state and federal funds over time. This is just, for illustration purposes, just to show you, the sort of the mix of the color of money for the various projects. Next slide, please. Okay, this information is summarizing this slide is to summarize that information. 171 million of Transnet dollars have been invested on the corridor since the extension began back in 2008 up until the end of last fiscal year. The remainder of the funds are those funds that have been leveraged in order to complete as many projects as possible. Next slide. Now looking into the future, so this is for fiscal years 21 to 25, you can see that Transnet is contributing 51 million, and we are able to attract other funds, mainly state and federal formula funds, for these other projects. And actually within here is where you find the 59 million for the 2 new train sets. If you add the prior expenditures plus the new, the expenditures going forward, it's nearly $700 million. And this, by the way, does not include investments that have been made on the Delmar Bluffs. The Delmar Bluffs is more of a state of good repair type of project. The Transnet program focuses more on capacity expansion. So even though the Del Mar Bluffs, it's a very important project, it's a project that we manage separately. Next slide, please. And next slide, thank you. Okay, so one of the questions was, where have all of the funds been invested? And so I've gone through those. And so now I want to get into how much is left of that 188 million. So what we need to do is look at how much has been expended over time. The orange bars show how much in transnet dollars have been expended on the corridor since 2008. And then the line chart that you see there is just the cumulative of that. You can see that we've already arrived at a little bit over 220 million in transnet investments. Next slide. So you may wonder, if the original amount was only 188 and we're already at 220 million, how can that be? We've already exceeded the transnet amount. If you look at this chart, the way that we manage the dollars for the corridor, we want to ensure that the purchasing power of that original 188 remains. You may not spend it that year, but we want to make sure that you have that purchasing power. So over time, that was adjusted for inflation. And that's why we've been able to get to that 220 million where we are currently. As the expenses occurred, you can see that the balance of that transnet amount essentially went down. And now as it goes into the future, since we have dollars already in the budget, by 2027, once all of those expenditures occur, there would be a balance of about 96 million for the coaster corridor. So I want to take a quick pause here because I've gone, a little bit of an oversight and explaining where the dollars have been invested, how much money remains. But I wanted to now cover more of a program-wide status and go over some of the challenges that Sanding and the region are facing and how that may influence our ability to provide for those $95 million when the time comes. Next slide, please. So you may have heard that the transnet forecast had some errors in it. The original forecast is shown here as a line, as a green line. And the original estimate was to collect about 14 billion in constant 2002 dollars during that 40-year time period. That was based on a number of assumptions. One of those was that by 2048 there would be a population of 4.4 million people. Since then, we've corrected the errors that we found. We've also revised the population to what we believe now is more correct, and that is 3.7 million. The bottom line is that between 2008 and 2048, instead of 14 billion, what we believe will be collected is 8.8 billion, which is not quite half. It's a little bit over half of that original amount. But in terms of completing all of the projects that were included in the Transnet ordinance, it's going to be very difficult to do so unless we get additional revenues to be able to do that. Next slide, please. Back about a year and a half ago, we provided an update to the SANDAG board in terms of what were the costs for the remaining projects and the anticipated revenues to be able to pay for those. So in blue, we show the costs of the remaining projects. And so you might recall that slide that I showed that had the future projects. So all of those projects that we haven't yet started, the cost of those are included there. The 95 million that would be the balance for the coaster corridor is also included here. Grand total is about $24 billion. And this is in year of expenditure dollars. Sort of in the middle of this chart, we show the more certain revenues that we anticipate to be available to be able to pay for some of these projects. So the first one is Transnet. There's, obviously there's still some Transnet that we will be collecting, about $2.3 billion. This is net of the debt service. You might recall that I mentioned that Sandag accelerated completion of projects by issuing bonds. Well, there's debt service that needs to be paid between now and 2048. And so the remainder of that is about $2.3 billion. The other source of funds that we anticipate using towards completion of these projects is the anticipated formula funds from existing state and federal funds. Those we anticipate collecting about $6.3 billion. So when you add the transnet and you to the state and federal formula funds, you get about $8.6 billion. So another way of looking at this is 24 billion worth of projects are chasing 8.6 billion of revenues. It's a very big number, very big gap, if you will. The gap is shown at the bottom, 15.8 billion. We believe that we can bridge some of that gap with competitive funds that we may get through grants and competitive cycles from existing sources. And those could be like the SB1 that was approved by the state not too long ago. If we are able to raise the funds that historically Sandag has been able to raise, we might collect up to 6 billion. But if you take that 6 billion out of the 15.8, that still leaves close to 10 billion that we don't have any other funding identified for. And so as we look into the future to be able to complete as many of the remaining projects, we are faced with either delaying some of those projects or looking for other revenue sources that might help us to complete all of the remaining projects in the transnet ordinance. Next slide, please. So a few policy considerations for the NCTD board, and as you consider these, one of the things that I need to make you aware of is that back in September of 2019, the Sandag board programmed all of the anticipated funds or all of the funds that we anticipate to collect between now and 2025 on a number of projects. So that amount was about 600 million, about 59 million that was identified for the 2 new train sets. There was also some money identified for the Delmar Bluffs and for additional studies along the Lausanne corridor to take the tracks off the bluffs eventually. But the bottom line here is that Sandag does not have any additional funding capacity for either new phases of work or new projects until fiscal year 2026. We don't have any funding laying around to be able to match programs should those come about. So as NCTD considers, how to move forward to complete projects, and I think, Katie in her earlier presentation alluded to some of these, the district could, leverage, some of the completed early phases of work, essentially those projects that are ready to go. Project readiness is something that's considered very valuable when you apply for grants, because funding agencies much rather give you money for construction than for design, for example. And so there's a number of projects, as I mentioned, there's at least $500 million worth of needs that are on projects that are, nearly ready to go. So that's one consideration. Another consideration is to leverage the district funds to match outside funding. We would love to help you, but at this point, all of the funding that we have has already been programmed, meaning allocated to other projects through fiscal year 25. And then another consideration would be to leverage the upcoming service increases on the coaster to attract outside funding. One of the things that we've heard is that some of the funding agencies would rather wait until there's improvements in the number of trains that run on the coaster before they provide additional funding for capital projects. Now that there's funding for the 2 new train sets that would allow you to do that, that should be leveraged to say, hey, you know what, this has already been procured. It's the train sets are getting built. Let's partner with other funding agencies to try to bring additional capital dollars. There's also discussion about the new federal administration. Obviously, there's a rescue plan that's underway for very near-term needs, but there's also discussion about infrastructure needs, and also the transportation bill needs to be reauthorized. And so there's all of these different conversations that are happening at the same time, where NCTD could, influence or try to influence the outcome and gain additional funds. And obviously, it's something that SANEG is also looking to do as well. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will conclude, and I'm open to any questions.
All right, thank you, Jose. I see no hands up. Are there any questions? There's Board Member Desmond. Question.
Jose, hey, I missed you.
Supervisor, I've missed you too. Good to see you.
Yeah, well, you know what I'm going to ask about. So even though I'm wearing my transit hat, and our buses use the 78, I noticed in here on your projects completed and your future projects, or I guess a project in work on the 78, one is the I-15 and 78 interchange, which thank you very much, that's going through an EIR. And then you also mentioned the future projects, the I-5 and 78 interchange. What's left out here in your future projects is the HOV lanes that were part of the 2004 transnet. So are they gone, or are they just not in your future?
Oh, so the HOV lanes, those are also going through the environmental process. So those are actually listed in the in progress.
Well, the HOV lanes, I mean between the 15 and the 78, not just at the interchanges.
Right.
I guess I don't see them in your chart here.
Okay, so if they're not there, they should be there. But yeah, so the HOV lanes are currently going through the environmental process. And so in our view, those are in progress, yes.
Well, I disagree, because I know they are for the interchange at the 15 and 78, but they're not for the length between the two interchanges. So that's the part that's left out. I don't want to belabor that. I just want to make sure they weren't removed.
I will check on that again and get back to you.
Okay, thank you. And then, yeah, as pointed out earlier, most of our customers in North County Transit District are riding the buses, and those buses use the 78 as well, and they get stuck in traffic sometimes. So we'd still want to make sure those improvements to help transit as well. So thank you very much. Good to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
Board Member Quirk.
Thank you, Jose. There's a ton of information that you presented, so I'm still kind of spinning. I know it was sent earlier, a week or so ago, but a couple of questions. You used the word corridor, and I know SANDAG uses the word corridor. I don't really understand that phrasing and how it's relevant. Why don't you talk about, say, the 5 highway? Like corridor, I don't understand what that means. The rail is really separate and independent of the 5 corridor. So can you explain to me why you use that phrase, and is it helpful? Because I'm trying to follow you, but you're talking about corridor, and you're moving from Camino Real to maybe the 5 to maybe the coaster. It's very hard for me to follow, in all honesty. But can you speak to that? And then I've just got some other comments, but
sure. So when we talk about corridor, and the word corridor is actually part of the ordinance, so that's one of the reasons that I use that word. But when we look at transportation needs, we look at, say, people that live in Oceanside and they need to go to downtown San Diego to work. They may choose to go, they may choose to drive. They may choose to take the train. Some of them may choose to take the, Pack Highway. There's a number of different options. And so in terms of looking at the transportation needs, we look at it sort of beyond the existing infrastructure that's there, to look at the various ways that people might choose to get from point A to point B. So that's, using the word corridor as it was, included back then, that's essentially what we did. Currently, there's something that's called Corridor System Management Plan. And it's something that the California Transportation Commission is encouraging regions like ours to take a look at in a more holistic way for how people may move and what would be the best option for them to do so. And so again, it's looking at sort of a wider, not just the width of the freeway or the width of the tracks, but wider, and say, okay, the people going from point A to point B have a number of options, and maybe new options, maybe those are not there yet. And so if you evaluate those, you may come up with solutions that are either different or maybe complementary to each other. And so that's why when we look at corridors, we look at the entire suite of transportation options that people have.
Okay, thank you. So just a, maybe a broad comment, you think about corridors in North County, the 5 highway is effectively 99+% of the commuting in that north-south corridor. I know that the coaster gets a lot of attention, but it's tiny. There's 300 riders a day, right now in a county of 3.3 million people. The other comment that I have, and this is broadly for Sandag, it goes a little bit beyond the presentation here, but I'm hearing a lot of talk that doesn't include kind of some major technology changes hitting us right now with companies like Tesla and self-driving, and that really seems to be revolutionary. I follow this pretty closely, and it doesn't seem like Sandag is incorporating enough of that into its future planning and presentations like this. I think it's going to disrupt a lot of things in a major way. And, we as the NCTD board, the Sandag board, staff, we're trying to, think about the present day, but also the next 5, 10, 20, and 30 years. And that's a major revolution that's coming. And I feel like Sandag's not adequately addressing that. Do you have any thoughts about that? Maybe you are, and I'm just not aware of it, but can you speak to that?
So I would encourage you to, tune in to our board meetings, coming up over the next few months. You may have heard about the 5 big moves that we are, essentially, bringing to the community in terms of, what could the future bring? What are the sort of the visionary solutions that we could do to better address the mobility needs of the region? So, I hear what you're saying, and it's something that, we've been trying to do. The details of it are still to come out. So I would encourage you to tune in to our board meetings. We will be obviously going out to the community as well to talk more about this. But yes, we are trying to incorporate sort of data-driven solutions, more modern solutions to people's mobility needs. So definitely.
Okay, yeah, and just, I'll make a final comment. I'm very supportive of things like bus rapid transit. I think, several people have said today, most of the riders in North County are taking the bus. So when we think about, technology, maybe there's self-driving buses, working with the system, the roads and the highways where we have 99% of our drivers or riders, excuse me. And then, we have, shortfalls and competing needs. Maybe we focus the dollars where the majority of the riders are rather than so much on rail, which has a tiny fraction, certainly here in the North County. The 5 big moves, as I understand it, details aren't totally out there, but they're talking about putting more rail in North County when the coaster has the lowest amount of riders, by far of all the lines in there. So, I'll pause or stop, but just want to share those observations. The coaster rider numbers are really, really bad. So trying to replicate rail in North County doesn't seem like a very smart idea. And that's what I understand the 5 big moves to be doing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those comments.
Board Member Contreras.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It is a ton of information, and I do appreciate the way that we're looking at these corridors, because as we have more transit-oriented development, people are going to be choosing other modes of transportation. I don't actually believe that the continued privatization of transportation, whether it be self-driving cars or self-driving whatever, that's not actually going to address our transit-oriented development in the smart growth direction that we're going. So yeah, I really appreciate taking a look at what these corridors are, what future plans for these corridors look like, and trying to mitigate the difference between providing a mode of transportation that is functional, easy to use, and that will be utilized by people. And taking into account, what Board Member Sanchez said a few presentations ago, right? Looking at where people actually want to go and building out nodes and creating a network that is functional and practical. So I just commend everybody that's been a part of this process. I know there's been a lot of public input, and I really support multimodal forms of transportation, because the future is, it's here, and we're seeing that people want more diversity in their ability to get from one place to another, especially once we're out of the COVID situation and, our cities continue to build out and we have different, maybe entertainment venues, different attractions that, we're just not going to be able to privatize transportation further without spending a lot of money on expanding freeways and whatnot. That is just never going to be able to accommodate the increase in population that we're going to be experiencing. So I really, really appreciate all the hard work that goes into reaching out to the public, getting public participation, reaching out to different cities and elected officials to get their perspectives. So I just thank you so much for the presentation, and it's a ton of information. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Board Member Von Wilpert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Jose, so much for presenting this information. I know it's not easy given that a lot of things have changed with our financial projections, as you very kindly explained. And I just want to echo what my fellow board members have said, including Member Quirk and Member Contreras, about the fact that things have changed dramatically in our technology even since 2004. Since this ballot initiative was proposed. And if you look back at the this slide, and I love that you have the ballot language on here, but the objective, number one, is to relieve traffic congestion and improve safety. And I don't think we've done that yet, even though we've tried. And it's because we have an incredible region and corridor. And thank you for explaining what corridor means. I too, Board Member Kirk was wondering, so I appreciate that. I've learned a lot. So I just, I'm wondering how much we are rethinking our goals. I know it takes long-term planning, and these funds take long-term planning, but even, it's been almost 20 years since we passed this ballot initiative. And so is this what the 5 big moves is intended to do, or incorporating things like driverless cars or buses or I'm wondering if we're going to be able to achieve our traffic congestion and safety goals if we continue down the same path.
Right. So, maybe taking a step back. So transnet is one tool that the region has to accomplish its mobility needs. And, back in 2004, there was a set of projects and programs that were approved by voters. Mm-hmm. The transnet is just a subset of the regional plan. And the 5 big moves is really, what's driving the regional plan. And so transnet would be a tool amongst other tools to accomplish the goals of the regional plan.
Okay. Thank you. No, I appreciate that. And thanks for all of your work and trying to get all this done at once. I know it's it's hard work, so I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you.
Vice Chair Edson.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Jose. So I think that there are some things that need to be mentioned based on the discussion that we're having. So in addition to in the corridor, for example, what percentage of residents of San Diego County actually use the I-5 corridor? Is that a number you can provide?
I can look for it. I don't have that with me.
Do you have an approximate number?
I do not.
Okay.
I work on the money side. I don't work on the number of people driving on a particular highway side.
Okay. There's also a significant amount of freight that uses the Los Angeles corridor and I-5, the I-5 corridor in general. And I know that in the past, it's been shared the amount of freight and trucks and stuff that having the Los Angeles corridor in its current state, even prior to the capacity enhancements of double tracking, how many trucks that takes off of the I-5 today. And Matt, you may have that number, since Jose is not the capacity guy, he's the money guy.
You're asking me for the percentage of the population that uses the I-5?
If you have that, but also the percentage of estimated number of trucks the Los Angeles corridor takes off of the I-5 by providing freight capacity.
So I don't have the entire Los Angeles corridor, and I do have the number, but I don't want to quote the number because I would be remembering off the top of my head. I believe it's for San Diego, it's about 25,000 trucks, but that may be a big, ginormous guess on my part. I think, Joel, hopefully you'll accept a little bit of an amendment to your question and an answer in the context that so much of what we're talking about in terms of the transnet program has not been fully implemented. So when we talk about the coaster, we just are reaching the milestone in the next year or so that we can operate increases since we purchased the railroad in 1994, 95. So much of what we're talking about, we're still at the beginning stages, not to mention the whole issue of land use within this region and how we're all working collectively to really improve the land use and to deal with the housing imbalance that occurs. So this is part of a thing that we're definitely going to be talking about in a lot more detail. And I think we need to put all of this discussions into a broader context so that people get a full understanding of what is happening and how it's occurring and how things will likely shape themselves in the future. So I would encourage the board, don't draw too many conclusions one way or another way, because we're really at the beginning of trying to create something different for land use and transportation within the state of California and likely throughout most major cities in the US.
So Matt, the current double tracking that has been going on as part of the I-5 corridor improvement will create greater frequency and capacity by adding, is it 11 more trains? Is that correct?
Actually, it will add, we will go from 22 to 44 coaster trains per day. The number of freight trains will grow from 3 to 5 to 8 additional on top of the 5 that already happened today. And then Amtrak frequencies will continue to increase, hopefully maxing out as a train coming every hour throughout the day. So significant capacity increases are planned in the future. And they're all tied to things not just related to passenger, but also to freight. Plans at the port directly impact the freight plans, movement plans on rail. So these things are all connected. So again, in 1993, up until probably call it next year, we would have never had the capacity to offer the types of services that were contemplated in the ordinance. We're reaching the first milestone. And if you look at our TSEP program of projects closely, you'll see there are additional milestones of project improvements that are yet not funded in Transnet that unlocks additional capacity. So again, we're actually at the beginning of the race. And I know some of you guys are wanting to call timeout or stop, but you're actually at the beginning of the race and discussion about how the service performs when you create a much better service that's more competitive to meet the market needs.
Thank you.
Board Member Acosta.
I just wanted to bring into to our thought process a little bit more of the potential for matching some federal money. We've got a new administration with a California VP, an administration that has talked about the second railroad revolution happening under their watch. So we've got a lot of dedication to electric, to cleaner, greener mass transit. And I think that there's some more opportunity to leverage our local funds. And in particular, to follow up with Mr. Nuncio on what you said about shovel-ready projects, because we know what you're talking about. And if there's some way that we can do a little bit more getting our projects ready so that we can get that federal matching dollar amount that we really need. I think I'm a pretty optimistic person, and this administration statements on the campaign trail and recently have really kind of underscored that optimism. I think that we're going to be able to get more dollars under this administration than the last one that was penalizing California. This one seems a little bit more friendly to some of these concepts.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Board Member Quirk, you didn't want to ask your question or make your comment?
Well, sure, I'll make it. Jewel asked a question about freight. There's about a couple years ago, the number that I saw was 30,000 freight cars per year, which translates to 82 per day. That's train cars. You know, there's a rule of thumb of 2 to 3 highway trucks per train car. So you could argue it's about 200, per day. There's another Sandag stat that shows overall freight, including pipelines, trucks, and trains. And the train accounts for 0.5% of overall freight, with effectively the other 99% as highway freight, just to answer those specific questions. And Matt, just to address your point, I know we're going to be talking about, performance and accountability, but, I'm hearing you. So, if we put all these, new spending plans in place and the clock starts counting now, I expect there to be accountability, and I'm very, very skeptical that we're going to see large increases in ridership for the coaster specifically. I know we're talking about a lot of other things, because the trend over the last 8 years, has been in the opposite direction, and that was before COVID. So again, I think we just need to, have accountability for all this money that we're spending.
Great, thank you. And I'll wrap this item up by pointing out that over the last several years, there have been really vigorous deliberations over Transnet. As you may recall, that was on the ballot a couple of years ago, and it received 58% of the voters' support, but these measures require 66 and 2/3. So it did not, it was not adopted. And we're currently on Transnet 2, and Transnet 1 and Transnet 2 both, we're kind of using the crystal ball approach, which means that they have to make a whole bunch of assumptions. And when Transnet 3 didn't pass, it left, we got to the bottom of the buckets quicker than I think anybody anticipated. And there's a lot of controversy over the projections and things that went on. I look forward to the continued conversation at Sandag about the RTP and coming up with a strategy that would allow us to go to the voters again and be successful. And I think that the key to that will be coming up with a RTP, a regional transportation plan that will receive broad support. And that means that projects that, enhance the freeways a bit, as well as mass transit, are going to be critical to having broad support. And frankly, we're riding on highways that haven't seen a whole lot of improvement. So I don't disagree that they do need some focus. So I look forward to that. And I know that Jim Desmond has been quite vocal about what his expectations are. And he comes with a group of people that will make a difference. So again, I'm glad to have him on the board, and hope that we can convince him that the programs that we have at North County Transit District are worth the support on Transnet 3. So with that, we do have 2 other items that are on the agenda that I would like to entertain a motion to receive the reports on those two items so that we can move into closed session as our agenda indicates. So that would mean that the update on the Spinner parking lot redevelopment assessment and the receiving of the quarterly report on the status of business initiatives for the second quarter of FY 2021, we would receive those items and not have oral presentation and questions. So if there is a motion to that effect, we could have a vote on that.
I'll second it, but I guess I would like to maybe see the one about the parking lots come back at a future meeting, because I'd like to hear that presentation. So I'll second the motion to receive them and make that official.
Okay, so I'll modify the motion to receive the reports, but to bring back the Sprinter stations at a future date.
Thank you. The parking lot, yeah, parking areas. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Jose. Appreciate your presentation. Sorry, I didn't mention that.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hey, say hello to everybody for me, Jose.
I will. Thanks so much.
Okay, on the motion of Board Chair Tony Krantz, seconded by Board Member Jim Desmond, to receive items 18 and 19 and to bring back agenda item 18 to a future board date. Board Member Acosta, how do you vote?
Yes.
Board Member Quirk?
Yes.
Board Chair Krantz?
Yes.
Board Member McNamara?
Yes.
Board Member Sanchez? Board Member Desmond?
Yes.
Board Member Jenkins?
Yes.
Board Vice Chair Edson?
Yes.
Board Member Contreras?
Aye.
On the motion of Board Chair Tony Krantz, seconded by Board Member Jim Desmond, to receive agenda items 18 and 19 and to bring back agenda item 18 to a future board date. Motion passes with all board members present voting yes. Board Member Sanchez absent.
Okay, thank you. We have remaining one closed session item. And as a reminder to those participating remotely, we're going to be needing to connect to the second Zoom invitation to participate in a closed session item. And at the end of the closed session, you will need to reconnect to the regular board meeting. So with that, Lori Winfrey, our general counsel, will take us into closed session.
Thank you, Chair Krantz. So we have one item today, as was noted. This is closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.8, conference with real property negotiators related to the Oceanside Transit Center development. This closed session will be regarding price and terms.
Okay, see everybody in the other session, other Zoom.
So the board is returning from closed session. They met in closed session to discuss price and terms related to the proposed development at the Oceanside Transit Center. All board members were present in closed session with the exception of board member Sanchez. All board members present voted to authorize staff to move forward with a negotiation of an option agreement. It is anticipated that the negotiated agreement will be presented to the board for consideration in open session in March of 2021. This concludes my closed session report.
Thank you. So with that, we are on to the executive director's report. Mr. Tucker, do you have anything to report?
Yes, very quickly. I have accepted a new position. There's going to be a press release announcing that I have been selected as the vice chair for the American Public Transportation Association. So I will fill that role from this point forward until the September board meeting, in addition to my role as serving on the commuter rail, serving as the chair of the commuter rail committee for APTA. I will also want to note to the board that we will be, I guess directly, will be working very closely with the new administration. And in fact, Friday, we are going to be hosting a call as part of my responsibilities that will include the new FRA administrator and the new chairman for the Surface Transportation Board. So those are going to represent good opportunities for us from an industry perspective to be involved and hopefully be able on this, to also advocate for the additional funding needs for North County Transit District. So with that, that completes my report.
Well, Mr. Tucker, I would, as I know that you are a gentleman with a great sense of humor, I want to applaud you for the way you presented that information, because when you say I have accepted a new position by, way of introduction, that does make one anxious. So I'm glad to hear that it's a position for which you can continue to serve as the executive director and take responsibility for improving services at North County Transit District. Congratulations on the appointment, and it is fantastic to have you in a position where you can advocate for public transportation. Are there any board members who have anything they would like to report? Oh, Board Member Acosta.
Hey, yes, I'm happy to be here as a board alternate. I just wanted to let you all know, if you hadn't heard already, and offer my congratulations again to my colleague, Councilmember Priya Patel, who is the primary delegate from Carlsbad to this governing board, and she just had a baby yesterday. So I'm very happy for her. We're all very proud and happy to have a new baby in Carlsbad, and I just wanted to extend my congratulations again and let you all know that just happened.
Is that what the previous appointment was? She was delivering a baby, was the previous appointment?
Oh, no, she was at our council meeting on Tuesday while in labor. So,
wow.
Yeah, she's very dedicated, but she had
Vice Chair Edson.
I just wanted to also offer my congratulations to Matt and Priya. That's great news. And yes, you did kind of torture us a little, Matt. Matt, just for the benefit of maybe some new people on the board, can you just give a 2-second introduction of what APTA is?
Yes, ma'am. APTA is the leading trade association for the public transportation industry. It is the primary representative for transit agencies in terms of advocating for funding from the federal government. It includes the business members, which comprise a significant portion of the membership, as well as transit agencies, and to include even board members.
And they offer some regular conferences that are pretty well known for anybody that's interested in transit. There's the bus rodeo that they generally offer. I don't know what the latest schedule is with the pandemic, but they also have a legislative conference back in DC, which I think will likely be a much more fruitful now that we have an administration that's a little more transit friendly. So I appreciate you being on that board. Okay, no other raised hands. So Anthony, are there any remaining public comments?
No, sir.
And the next scheduled meetings are the MISBETA committee meeting, February 25th at 2021 at 1 p.m. and the regular board meeting of March 18, 2021 at 2 p.m. And today's meeting will be adjourned in honor of Mr. Marquette Penniman, who passed away unexpectedly at the age of 50 on January 28, 2021. It wasn't COVID, but it was a real shocker nonetheless, and it's difficult when NCTD loses a member of the family. Mr. Penniman was a Breeze coach operator, and he was hired by MV Transportation in January of last year. And prior to joining MV, he was a Border Patrol agent. Mr. Penniman also loved to teach, and he coached football. His coworkers remember him fondly and describe him as a very spiritual person. Mr. Penniman leaves behind one son, 2 daughters, and 4 grandchildren. And in memory of Mr. Penniman, we are now adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.